Welcome to tonight's summit session. I'm Reagan Fulton. I'm the marketing director at Adventure Nannies, and I will be tonight's host. And we have the amazing Angela Hanscom here. Today's topic is one that I am personally super passionate about. If you've ever heard me talk, you are not going to be surprised that I reached out to this incredible person to tell us all about the profound impact of outdoor play. Taking care of children, as you guys know, really means that we embrace the opportunities to explore, learn, and grow. And I hope you know, and if you don't already, you're going to learn about how powerful it is to do those things in the outdoor world. So Angela Hanscom is a true champion for the importance of outdoor play. She's the visionary founder of Timbernook and has transformed how we think, how I personally think, I know, about nature-based experiences for children. She's the acclaimed author of Balanced and Barefoot, which is the first book I recommend to nannies who want to learn more about nature play. And it's a book that beautifully illuminates the critical role of outdoor engagement in early childhood development and really inspires families and educators to foster environments where children can move freely, take healthy risks, and develop essential skills through joyful exploration. Today, she's going to share some of her perspective, practical strategies, and invaluable advice how we can all embrace the power of outdoor play. So get ready. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I know this one wasn't on the list, but I'm going to kick off with a question just to get the conversation started. When we were emailing earlier today, I saw in your subject or in your signature line, the quote that if anybody in here has ever been into a presentation of mine about nature play, you probably have seen because it's been in my slides. And that is that nature is the ultimate sensory experience. So to kick us off, and we'll talk a little bit more about Timbernook and your story, but just tell us about that quote. What does it mean to you and why is it important enough that it's in your subject line?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, it is part of my story, but I've worked in all different settings, and typically an occupational therapist will work indoors with children. So, when I started this work with Timbernook, there was not a lot of OTs outside, in the woods treating children or, in giant mud puddles. It was very much that we would bring swings indoors. We bring a little box of sand inside and call that sensory. And we also engineer our clinics to be sensory. Like we'll have a balance beam with little plastic pickies on it and call that a sensory experience. And the more I did Timbernook, and I know like we're kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but the more I realized that nature was the ultimate sensory experience. And what we see out in the woods is you cannot replicate in a clinic setting or in a classroom setting.
So tell us about that. Like, how did you get
Okay.
from that occupational therapist clinical setting? What was that journey like to create Timbernook and
Yeah.
to move away from that kind of more clinical, traditional occupational? Because that's I always say when I'm giving my presentations, I'm not the expert. I'm not an occupational therapist, but this lady, she is. So you should listen to her. So I want to hear, well, how did you get from that clinical setting into the nature play and transition it there?
That was kind of my dream. But God had other plans for me because just a series of events happened in my life that I had no control over, basically. And what happened next was I kind of joined a mom's group because that was the thing to do at the time, to meet other moms. And I had people asking me questions. They knew I was an occupational therapist. And one of them was, my daughter is spinning in circles all the time. You're an OT. Why is she doing that? And I was like, I don't know. And then there was, a little boy that was having trouble paying attention in preschool. And she was also like, why is he having trouble paying attention in preschool? So it's just interesting questions. And I just kept paying attention. And then my daughter turned 5 finally, and it was time for her to go to kindergarten. And I remember thinking, we met with the teacher ahead of time. And I was a little nervous, like as a new parent that your kid's finally going to school. But the teacher, she looked at us and she said, this is not kindergarten like you guys remember growing up. She said, this is going to be more like first grade. She said, if your kids can't tie their shoes, please put elastic laces on or Velcro or put something so that we don't have to bother tying their shoes. She said, if they don't, if they have, we're going to have a 5-minute snack session basically. And she said, if that gets in the way of curriculum, it will be a working snack. So they'll have to eat while they do their paperwork. And then she said 15 minutes for recess. And she said, but when it snows, the leaves change color. And I was like, oh gosh. I'm like, it has maybe to do with a pigment in the leaf. I was trying to remember from my science classes in high school. I didn't really go to school for that. And it really helped me reflect on, I'm not an environmentalist. I'm not a naturalist or even a teacher, rather. So I had to reflect on what is my background and, what does occupational therapy have anything to do with nature programming? And that's when, I really started paying attention that the main occupation of a child is play, and outdoor play is a particularly meaningful occupation that if I asked you guys what was your fondest memories growing up, I bet most of you would say something about playing outdoors. But that particular occupation is really at risk. And so the whole mission behind Timbernook, like really over the years, what I've learned is not really a new idea. It's really to restore the occupation of outdoor play and to make it as authentic as possible. And that's why it's so therapeutic. It's true neighborhood play. There's a mixture of ages. It's a real play experience. It's a child's choice. It has to be their choice. And once we start controlling and taking away that agency, we really take away the therapeutic components. And that's kind of what we have done with OT. We've gone in the other direction. We've gotten so protocol driven. And we've taken away a lot of the therapeutic qualities of what we're doing with children. So I know it will lay the foundation for a talk, but basically what happened after that is I had a friend in marketing and she said, I think you should do summer camps because you're probably more likely to get children dropped off for the day. And I was like, summer camps? Like I was not trained to run summer camp. Usually we work one-on-one with children or a small group of children. So I was like, okay, I'll do 1 week of summer camp. And she's, no, you have to do 3 to market yourself. And at the time I had no idea what I was getting into because we're not used to directing a large group of children. And I didn't realize I was starting a business. I went to the town to ask for a sign and they said, no, you're starting a business. And so again, one thing led to the next. I filled the camps up because it was unique that a therapist was running camps at an affordable price. And they were fun. Like the ideas were fun. And so after the 3 weeks of summer camp, I was exhausted. Again, had no idea how much work it was to have that many children at my house. And so I'm like, I'm never, ever doing that again. I was so tired. But what happened was, something my gut told me to let's see what happens. And I had 4 volunteers that helped me from the university that were occupational therapy students because I thought what a great mentorship for them to see nature for its therapeutic value. And so those 4 OT students went back to university and I had 14 volunteers the next year. And so then I had 2 teachers reach out. One was a wildlife ecologist and a science teacher. And then the other one she was an elementary teacher. And she was the one who said, hey, wouldn't it be fun to do stories in the woods? For instance, we could read the story 3 Little Pigs, and then we could have bales, we could reenact the story, she said, at picnic tables. And as a therapist, I was like, wouldn't it be neat to bring, real bales of hay out into the woods and, bricks and logs and, wolf masks. And so they have the opportunity to build life-size 3 Little Pig homes and, have hours to play that and engage in muscles and senses. And so she was like, yes. And so that really shifted that first summer when I was by myself with some helpers. I was really much my ideas. It was adult-directed activities. They were fun, but it was, very different than the shift of where we had a play experience and the environment was inspiration. And then they might not bring home the 3 Little Pig homes, but they had an experience designed to create change in the child. And so after that point, every year I said, I'll do it 1 more year. And this was about 12 years ago.
I was gonna say, you said your oldest is 20 now.
Yeah, we're still going. And so after that, what happened was I had about 3 years into it. I released my camps in February because here in America, you have to release your summer camps way ahead of time. And so I was willing to do 4 weeks of summer camp. I didn't want to do summer camps all summer long. I'm like, I'm not supposed to be working here. So I released those camps. And then what happened is in a minute's time, I had wait lists for all 4 weeks. And I was like, I had 2 parents call crying, which made me feel guilty. And one's, hey, my kid got in last year, but didn't get in this year. What are you going to do about that? And I was like, I don't know. And then I had an occupational therapist reach out and a physical therapist asking if they could replicate the program because it was really unique for a profession at the time. There was not really that many people out there doing anything with therapy. And so it's when I went and got business mentors because I had no business experience, and they taught me how to license the program Timbernook. And Timbernook stands for timber is amongst the trees, and nook or cranny is like a hidden place amongst the trees away from the adult world and the fears of the adult world. It's where kids can be kids. And so what happened after that is I was going to market in New England because that was my plan, which keeps getting shot out of the water, by the way. And I wrote an article called Why Kids Fidget, and it went incredibly viral. Again, see how I had no control over this.
Yeah.
So it got picked up by the Washington Post, and then they sold world rights that Times of India, Jerusalem Post picked it up. And then I did a TED Talk for Johnson & Johnson on their main stage in front of 100,000 people. And then the book Bounce and Barefoot came about. And that's how Timbernook went to Australia. It's in the UK, throughout Canada, and the United States as well. And then really quick, 2017, there was a school knocking on my door saying, we want Timbernook in the schools. And I said, nope, we're not doing that. That's not the plan. But clearly that was the plan. And so now we're going to be in 10 schools, and we're starting to research them because we've been in schools long enough. It's hard to get in a school because you have to get the entire culture on board.
Yeah.
When it gets in, it really does affect the culture. And so that's what we're researching with the University of New Hampshire.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah,
I can't wait. I can't wait till that research comes out, and then I'll bring
Yeah.
it to my son's school.
Yes.
Yeah, because that is so wonderful. That is such an incredible. So the TED Talk. I don't think I realized that the TED Talk was before the book, because I've seen the yeah.
The first TED Talk.
Okay. There we go.
I was really pregnant for that one. Luckily, no one saw that. Just
Johnson people. Okay.
Goodness.
That is so incredible. And you, like you said, I'm sure you've heard this in it, but all the things that you say and all of the, you said, I'm not an ecologist, they came to me. What I love the most about what you do is that you teach those of us who really love to teach kids and love that, and I know it's grown for you, I'm sure. And those of us who do love to answer that question for the 5-year-old about why the color change. Teach us why that's so important and why we're drawn to it. Because I think so many nannies are drawn to this, outdoor play idea, but don't know why. And you give us the why. So I love that. So, for those who don't know, what really is the basis of why is it so important? We've kind of danced around it, you told those stories a little bit, but really what does outdoor play do for kids developmentally? And, why is it so important? And what have you found through your research?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two kind of major things. One is when you step outdoors, you have more ability to move in rapid ways. And what's happening is kids are sitting for an average of 9 hours a day in a chair is the most recent research I sat in on. And what's interesting about that is it can cause a lot of issues if you're constantly being restricted, right? So certain muscles that shouldn't shorten will shorten, and certain muscles that shouldn't lengthen will lengthen. And so it will affect your posture, but it's going to affect your gait. And the other thing is, if kids are constantly in this upright position, they're not moving in the ways they should. So they really need at least 3 hours of outdoor playtime a day. They need to spin in circles. They need to go upside down. They need to move in really pretty rapid ways because inside the inner ear are little hair cells and there's fluid in there. And when you move in vigorous ways, what that does is it develops what we call the vestibular sense. And that sense is key to all the other senses. So if that's underdeveloped, which we're finding a lot of kids are walking around with an underdeveloped vestibular sense, it can affect what we call sensory integration. And that is really like organization of the brain so you can pay attention in the classroom. So let's break it down just a little bit of what that sense does. Again, that's plenty of movement opportunities. The first thing it does is it helps you to know where your body is in space. So it helps a child to get from point A to point B safely, to get on and off playground equipment effectively, and to stay in their seat without falling out. So what's happening is some kids are literally falling out of their chairs in school now. And teachers are reporting that kids are starting to run into each other more frequently. And so this is a real red flag if kids are starting to fall from an early age. And so The way we treat that as a therapist is we will have them, you remember I talked about the astronaut board, is we'll position them on that astronaut board and we spin them in all different ways. So we'll have them lay on their side, we'll have them sit upright. We'll use swings, same thing. We'll put them on the swing in different ways and spin them so that they have a very good sense of body awareness when they navigate their environment. So the same is true with astronauts. That's why Mary Kawar worked with NASA, is they get in a machine before they go in outer space that moves them in all different directions. So when they go into an anti-gravity environment, they can really have a good sense of body awareness as they're navigating those environments. So we do the same thing for treatment. And what's happening is sometimes I'll see a child spinning in circles, which is really healthy for them. And I'll hear an adult say, "Stop, you're going to get dizzy." Or "Get down from that rock, you're going to get hurt." But if we keep them from moving those different ways, the adults actually become the barrier to that neurological development that needs to happen so they can be safer and more capable in their environment. So, things like swings on the playground, all that stuff, I remember spinning on swings when I was a kid. Some of those things I'm hearing that they're banning swings or they're being restricted on how they use swings to keep them safe. But as therapists, we really want to work with the educational field to promote being able to move in those different ways so that they can have a very capable neurological system.
Oh, that drives me nuts to hear that they're banning, so because that's a 100%. And you know, I'll s I'm just gonna put a blanket on. I feel like so much of what I've done in my own practice is inspired by your work. So, everything you're saying, I'm like, "Yes." I used to run a nature preschool for my backyard, my background, and I used to, when kids were even upset, I'd be like, "Okay, let's go swing on the swing. Go swing on your belly for a little bit," even as like a soothing mechanism, because that's the
Yep.
swings are my favorite tool.
Yes.
Um, so that's incredible. Could you tell, because I know I've heard it about about the proprioceptive sense too, and the underdeveloped
Hmm.
perceptive sense, because I know that's another one that a lot of, we all know about all of the regular five senses, and that's crazy that kids are falling out of chairs. But what
And
is I know it's proprioceptive, but could you tell us a little bit about that and
yeah.
what is going on with kids in that sense as well?
So basically, what's happening is OTs will talk a lot about the importance of heavy work, right? So it's like push pull activities. And if you look at outdoor play, kids are naturally getting a lot of heavy work. So if I'm watching kids in Timbernook, they're dragging like pallets across the woods to build a fort, or they're picking up big logs. Or if they're building a dam, same thing, you're picking up heavy rocks. And all of that, what it does is it gives nice senses to the joints and muscles. And that helps you to know where your limbs are in relation to each other. It helps with body awareness, and it also helps with knowing how much force to use when playing games like tag without hitting too hard, or holding a chick without squeezing the poor chick or the frog. We do this sometimes. Kids will catch frogs and they squeezing the frog too much. So that sense is developed through a lot of heavy work. And we're at the point where we're banning tag because kids are getting more and more aggressive. But we really want to understand, why are so many kids presenting with this regulation issue? And again, the way we treat that is through heavy work. And so climbing trees, all of those things used to give you nice sensation to the joints and muscles and helps you know where your limbs are in relation to each other. And again, how much force to use when playing games like tag. So if kids are just going, pretty sedentary, they're not getting a lot of heavy work, you have short 20-minute recess sessions, you're just not getting as much big body work. And then you go home and you're on electronics, you're not, a lot of those electronics, you're not getting resistance to the joints and muscles. So that system is going to be affected if they're not getting as much outdoor play time.
Absolutely. What does that look like? I think it's clear, falling out of your chair and not being able to stay upright is like a clear translation to an adult. But in terms of the proprioceptive and like tag translating to like adulthood, and if that sense doesn't develop, what kind of other problems can come
Yeah.
from that?
Yeah. Well, so the vestibular, we will advocate for older generations to keep moving. So a lot of us, this is not proprioception, this is vestibular, but if we're not moving enough, that's one reason why we don't tolerate rides when we get older.
So I can't do spinny rides anymore.
Yeah, so like a lot of us just aren't moving as much. And so we might not, go on the spinny rides or the roller coasters anymore. You feel nauseous. And with the really older generation, we want them to keep moving because we want to prevent falls and hip fractures. And so, water aerobics, all of that stuff is really important to keep that system strong. And then the proprioception system, I actually I'm not sure how that relates to adults, except they probably don't know their own strength. Like they might be like play fighting with someone like when you're older, like teasing, and they're like, so it's just their regulation is off with force.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if they're close talkers.
I say the only other thing I can think of is like having
Yeah.
really bad handwriting because not knowing how hard to push on a pencil and like never
Yeah.
developing good
Yep.
handwriting or anything like that.
Yep.
Only one I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah,
Too,
and I think maybe close talkers.
for sure. I say there was a good question that I wanted to drop in here. You were talking about heavy work. How can you talk about heavy work in terms of how similar it is to the more general concept of gross motor development and like gross motor work?
So we kind of break it down by the senses, so there's a vestibular perception, the visual, tactile, smell, all that stuff. And then gross motor in general relies on having a good vestibular sense and having good proprioceptive sense. But, for coordination, knowing where your body is in space as you navigate your environment, that's really key. So I would say body awareness and safety are the biggest things to pay attention to. Yeah.
Amazing. I'm going to save this question for the end because I think it's a little big. Besides just being fun, like what are the most important ways that outdoor play really helps children develop like their bodies, minds, emotions, whole body development?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So when I do speaking engagements, it's usually at least 90 minutes for the keynote. And then it's like another whole workshop where they do like a Timbernook experience and then we analyze the therapeutic benefits. And it's every aspect of the growing child is worked on. So let's say, for instance, children are in giant mud puddles and they're just catching frogs. Often I have an image that shows children that are playing with a little box of sand, and there might be a gardening thing going on in the box of sand. And then there's kids in these giant mud puddles catching frogs. And so I say, now both are considered a sensory experience. However, if our true objective is to create change to the senses, which one do you think will be more likely to do that? And so if you really start thinking about it and you take a step back, the audience will often point out so many things. First of all, in the giant mud puddles, it's a whole body sensory experience, right? It's head to toe muddy. I'm sure it's not even under the mud puddle. Like it probably smells different, for different people. There's real frogs in there. And so you have that component that's super meaningful to children. And then there's endless play opportunities. So I might pick up a stick and have 100 play affordances, or they're called visual affordances. So I might have like 50 ways to play with that. And then you might have 50 different ways. We might have some overlap, but I'm going to inspire you to play with that stick in ways you might have not thought of. And so that leads to more creative play. So there's just endless opportunities for play, sensory development, motor, cognitive. There's communication with other children, like connection in person is huge too. All these kids are going home. I have teenagers now, so I know they tell me stories where the kids go home and they're on screens. And it's, sometimes the only interaction these teenagers have is they're like on screens with someone else. So from an early age, connecting with other people and having the social skills to stand up for yourself and, set boundaries with other children, to ask for something, to negotiate, to practice getting frustrated with other children, like regulating emotions, all the good stuff happens out there. And it's hard to replicate in a classroom setting.
That's amazing. And I can just only imagine how well rounded your children are as teenagers and young adults having the experience they did. And, you mentioned so many of the benefits and really talking about them. I think that a lot of nannies understand it. Do you have any, nuggets or like even one-liners, ways that nannies can talk to the parents they work for? Because I think that's a big struggle that a lot of nannies have is they know how important it is to get outside with their kids and get messy and do all of this nature play. But
Yeah.
they also answer to parents who sometimes don't understand what
Yeah.
the developmental, and obviously I always say, throw the experts under the bus first, give them the books, give them the articles, send them these things. But, are there any just, real tips that you can give that are easy ways to talk about the
Yeah.
benefits and why it really, why it's okay to be messy and why it's okay to, take risks and possibly get hurt and why that's so beneficial for their kids,
Yeah.
especially in
Well,
the face of fear. Because I think
yeah.
that's what the nannies are facing is the
Oh,
fear that the parents have because they're not there.
yeah. So there's two things. The first one is I want to explain why it's important to get messy from a little, like from the sensory standpoint, just so you guys have that nugget. And then I want to talk about why, like how to address it with the parents. So the first one is one thing that we're noticing is a lot of kids don't like that tactile sense. Like that can feel really aversive for some children. Like they might not like glue on their fingers. They might not want to get dirty. And the way that we have traditionally treated that as therapists is we'll use a brushing protocol. Probably some of you have heard of this. It's like a surgical brush, and they brush the child like, and it's really just deep pressure. And what that does is that neurologically overrides that light touch sense that can feel aversive for some children and integrates that sense. And so I was thinking about this again, kids playing outdoors. And if you picture a child on the beach, let's say, and they're building a sandcastle. Well, they're getting that light touch sense, but they're digging in the dirt, which is like that deep pressure at the same time. And because they are able to get deep enough, that helps to actually override that light touch sense and integrate that sense. It's the same with climbing trees. Like that sap might feel gross, but because you're getting deep pressure while you're getting that light touch sense, that helps to integrate that light touch sense.
What's insane is so just a little bit of background. I'm autistic and I actually really don't like sand. Like
Yeah.
the light touch of sand, but week of vacation at the Atlantic Ocean in South Carolina, and it's like that denser sand that you can build really nice sandcastles. I love to go dig in the sand and build sandcastles. And
Yeah.
it doesn't bother me when I'm doing that. And I've never thought about that, but you just said that. And that makes sense because the deep touch is like overpowering the itchiness of the sand
Yeah.
for me. So that's
Yeah.
incredible, and yeah,
That's
so
awesome.
real.
Yeah, and so if you compare that again to a little box of sand, the problem with that is you can't get deep enough, right? So you're just getting that tactile sensation, but you're not creating actual change to the senses. So again, providing outdoor play opportunities that actually create change to the senses is key. And so that's one thing that connecting the dots for educators and for parents is really eye-opening because once you know, you're like, "Oh, this is I'm not," it's hard to go back. The other one is, as a healthcare professional, I was always taught in my ethics classes to do no harm. And we're at the point where actually causing harm to children by restricting them so much and taking away enough outdoor playtime. It is affecting development in pretty extreme ways. So I always talk to parents like, we can't keep doing what we're doing. They really need this more than anything else. Well, there's other things that are for too, but outdoor play is really critical to development. And so I think just laying it out there of how thing like development is changing is also really eye-opening to parents. So we do a lot of connecting the dots here at Timbernook for different communication tools to really educate people on the importance.
I love that. So yeah, this is what your child's doing, and this is what it's doing for them, and connecting those dots. That is a great tip. I love that. I'm going to shift a little bit, and I'm going to use first the questions that were dropped in the chat
Mhm.
before we transition into ways that nannies can encourage more outdoor exploration in city spaces. Because a couple people brought up, and I want to ask first about how Timbernook interacts. Does Timbernook work in any urban areas? And
Yeah.
the questions asked both schools that don't have access to nature. How do you work with that?
Yeah,
How
yeah.
are school settings handling considerations that have led to safe as meaning indoors behind a locked door and needing to know how to barricade themselves and quickly in a post Columbine era? But I think that's something that a lot of people have questions about when it comes to outdoor play in schools. And so both that safety issue, I don't know if you've come up across it at all with Timbernook in terms of like how do we make safe outside and just how do we, in terms of access to the outdoor in those urban areas.
Yeah. So, all right, I'm going to start with the first question. As far as Timbernook working with urban settings, like the Timbernook, like timber, like it has to be within nature. So we do want to partner with schools that are from cities. Like right now, we have kids that drive an hour and they do field trips at Timbernook, but we feel like there's got to be property closer. And it's just really knocking on the right doors and trying to find partnerships. Really, we're motivated to try to figure out because I feel like they need it more than anyone. And when they do come for a field trip, they appear to be very play deprived. It's like I don't know how to explain their play, but there's a sense of urgency about it. They know they have a limited time. It makes me want to cry. It's like they have 3 hours and they're going to make the best of it, but it's very urgent. And so it's very clear that these children need more opportunities for something like Timbernook. There are other programs that are designed in a city, but I still feel like it's different than when you're in the woods and you're building societies in their own worlds. And so, again, increasing access, working with partnerships is really important. But there are also like adventure playgrounds, which are probably the closest you can get to Timbernook. There's no woods, but they at least have loose parts play. It's a completely different program, but they do have some overlap where the adults do step back and allow for child directed play opportunities. As far as safety goes, I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but we have our own safety protocols that we have to go through. We are a licensed program, so different organizations and schools will adopt Timbernook programming and have their own safety protocols that they follow. We're just a specific licensed program, and we mandate training to stay really strong. And they hiss like hazards versus age like appropriate risk taking. And then we train them on what's reasonable risk taking, what is not reasonable risk taking out there, and when to go in, when not to go in, kind of thing. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. I feel like you almost have a little bit more awareness when you're out and about because
oh yeah.
you don't have the false sense of security of the indoors. And yeah, you're more aware of your surroundings. Um, so thank you so much for that. Is there any, just in terms of how nannies who might live inside, obviously getting out to where, getting out into woods, but if it's not in the woods, but just when you can get those little pockets of outside time or little pockets, are there any ways that nannies can encourage kind of that free outdoor play when they live in a more urban setting?
Yeah. So if you want to read even more, the book does go into detail and ideas and stuff. But just to give you a sample, you can use different adult type materials and bring it outdoors and set up a little bit of an invitation to play kind of thing. If you have puddles, like I love puddles because you can place something like kitchenware right near the puddle. And right away, what you're doing is you're using what we call shaped affordance theory. So you're using the mud puddle right next to kitchenware, and they start experimenting with those two objects together. The other thing is like older children or even little children, fort building is kind of a classic pastime. Again, these are a little bit older, but, having materials like old curtains, you can get from garage sales or Goodwill, lumber, pallets. We use milk crates, bricks, but so every Timbernook site has a Home Depot. So it's this little Home Depot area where they can pull materials because they're constantly building.
That's
We have our own actual curriculum that comes out too. So there's a staging area that's separate from the Home Depot, but it's almost like your preschool should have building blocks. Every Timbernook site has building materials. So having access to things where they can build is really key. And then the other thing is the other children are part of the environment. So having mixed ages or having multiple children actually, to me, makes life easier. They inspire each other to play in different ways. And encouraging parents to do something similar. Don't just do a play date. Parents are getting really busy and overscheduling their kids that they're not prioritizing setting up time to have kids over for the entire day. And so really encouraging them to get outdoors, invite kids over for the entire day is really important for socialization. And there's a lot of lonely kids. It's really sad.
I think The thing that you just like really didn't say right there was set up a structured game and get up this exact activity and to do the, like I think even just play date scare nannies sometimes. And there are reasons
Well,
too besides this.
yes.
Parents, but you don't have to have all these activities and, Pinterest perfect play date. That's not a play date, just giving them the materials and the environment to
Yeah.
make their own fun is all you got to do. That's
Yep.
really what's better for them. That's what I heard right there. So I'm
Yeah.
gonna
Totally.
always remember that as a mom too.
Definitely.
um, so amazing. There was another question that I wanted to ask, and you mentioned your girls are teenagers now, and they are coming back with their stories, and so I think this is one that as kids grow and they are teenagers, and then this question was about caregivers and adults as well, but then also teenagers because teenagers. How can we make outdoor play more fun, enjoyable, and accessible for adults, caregivers who are trying to get outside with their kids, or the teenagers who are maybe resistant to it, so that way they can support them and keep them safe and continue to get outside throughout as they grow? Not necessarily how do we get the kids outside, but how do we get outside as adults and make that fun?
Yeah. We've been having many requests over the years to do adult experiences and teen experiences because it's like permission to play like that. And it's hard to get that many people in the place with that kind of materials. So I think that, yes, they can benefit from it as much as the adults. We're actually going to do a teen experience this summer where it's a glow in the dark, like nighttime warrior camp where they have, a battle and stuff out there. And they're super excited about it. My daughter's 20 and she's already talking about it, whose team they're going to be on and how they're going to steal from the other group when they're not looking. But I do think that we need to remember that teens especially need to play, and adults. I'm very concerned for our teenagers because of some of the stories I've been hearing and having girls that are that age, and the socialization pieces are really fascinating to me. They're just not able to like talk to people in person. It's funny, my girls went to a private school and then they went to public school when they went to high school, and it was like night and day. They're both very friendly and would say hi to people, and people are like, it's just very interesting. They think, what's wrong with you? Or they'll pull out their phone so they don't have to look at you in the face. So I think, giving them opportunities for this kind of play, it's just so important from a young age. We have gone into some schools where the young kids, they get Timbernook all the way up through, and it shows. You can see the difference in those kids that get play from a young age to those that didn't have it and they just struggle. They like don't know what to do with themselves. They're uncomfortable. So I think the answer I'm really getting at is those that you can do this early with, and what you guys really matter is like getting them to play and being huge advocates for play from a young age. It really makes a world of difference.
Absolutely. That is so amazing. So, moving on to, do you have any favorite stories that you can share that really just exemplify how outdoor play has changed a child development? Whether it's been one of those kids that you got to see grow up, go through the program, any just like story that really drives home the power of outdoor play and how it can change a child's development.
Yeah, this story is actually about the importance of adults stepping back, which is actually the hardest piece and probably one of the most important to Timbernook. We're so used to being so close to the kids. And what we learned over the years is if we're too close to kids, let's say building a fort, the kids would start turning to the adults for constant reassurance. Is this okay? Or can you do this for me? Or there's more tattling going on. But we learned that when we really step back, and we actually have a toddler program where adults come with their toddlers, and we also try to pull them back a little bit. You can't hide on toddlers, but
Mhm.
we do try to reduce adult presence out there because the kids really need to learn to initiate their own play ideas. They're so used to being entertained and everything's done for them. And so there was this one time where for me, it was a little hard to watch, but it was a really powerful reminder on the importance of stepping back. And this was, I think, the kids were 6 or 7. It was a field trip and they were building a teepee. And there was a group of girls. And all I heard was a boy went up to them and said, "You need to let me play." And right away, we were training too. So when you're training, you want things to go nice. But something told me to let's just see what happens. And the little boy had scissors. So we're all like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? So the girls ended up forming a chain with their hands and defending their forehead and saying, no, we won't. And so the boy, he cut a piece of their twine and they had gems in their fort. And so he took their gems and he took off running. And so what happened was the girls ended up chasing him in the woods over and over again. They must have done 3 or 4 laps around the entire woods. And one of the providers was like, okay, well, something is bound to happen. And so sure enough, he got tired and he was frustrated. So he's like, fine, just take the gems, and gave it back to them. The girls went back to their fort, redecorated their teepee, and they're singing because they were triumphant. They got their gems back. And the boy was interesting as he went over to a tree and he crossed his arms and he was sulking. He was upset. One of the little girls left the fort after a couple minutes and went down and sat right beside him. And we, out of respect, we again give them space. So we couldn't hear what they were saying, but we could hear the noise level. And so she starts calmly talking to him. And then right away he's blah, 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 blah. And so she puts her hand up, like talk to the hand type thing. And so then he calms down for a second, but then he yells again. And so she does the hand thing gesture. And so what was interesting is his voice comes down and he starts calmly talking to her. And then all we saw is she waves him on to play. And so that little boy was included for the rest of the week. It was no longer an issue. Now, if we had gone in right from the beginning and said, you need to let him play, what opportunities do you think they would have missed out on?
Yeah, and they probably wouldn't have played.
Yes.
Yeah, he probably wouldn't have ever really wanted to play and really belonged. And that is so incredible. And just, yeah.
Right. So they solved their own problem, right? So they learned conflict resolution through play, which is the best way to practice those skills. And, he probably learned maybe yelling isn't the best way to be included. Okay, sometimes you have to practice, you have to test things out, test out different theories of what works, what doesn't. He was allowed to get upset. No one was telling him to be quiet. He got frustrated. The girls learned to set boundaries with them. They defended their fort. That was, for my girls growing up, I was so thankful that they were able to set boundaries with people growing up. And then she practiced empathy, something you have to just experience. She practiced communication skills with him, patience. She waited till he calmed down. And then he was authentically included. And so it was no longer an issue. He could have resented them and they could have resented him if we had forced it and made it not a choice. And so because they decided it and they worked it out themselves, it was no longer an issue. So I often think how often do we do that? How often do we step in too soon and we do it for them and they don't learn those basic communication, problem solving skills that are best done through play?
Even I was thinking, he wore himself out too. He probably was easier to talk to after he wasn't so tired too.
Yeah, exactly.
That is so incredible. Well, besides that moment, because I feel like that one could have been the answer to this too, what is the most rewarding part of seeing children thrive and spending time in outdoors throughout your career?
Yeah, I think it's super fun to watch the older kids that have done Timbernook for so long, and they take play to a whole different level. They create societies and their own worlds out there. There's one time where I heard a horn blow and kids came running from all over the different parts of the woods. And this girl had a feathered mask and she's your top spy, top commander, and started pointing these hierarchies. And they were basically going to war. It was really, they were trying to capture the flag, basically. They were trying to steal gems from each other. But it's really fun to watch because those are the memories that my girls remember growing up, of the best memories growing up. And they learned, confidence and, they know who they are. They don't struggle with any sense of who am I as a person, and just really friendly, nice people, but very courageous. I think being able to play that way and overcoming fears in a playful way made them more adventurous. They dirt bike now. My daughter played hockey with all boys for a long time and then played in college. And yeah, so it's neat to see them later on go off for snowmobiling for 50 miles by themselves and be confident, capable, wholesome adventures, and they stay out of trouble, which is really nice. So it's like giving them the right kind of risk taking. So yeah.
So you've got the case studies that it works now.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, before we let you go, obviously Barefoot and Balanced, if you haven't read it yet, I've got somebody. There we go. If you have not read Barefoot and Balanced yet, please do. I was looking for my copy before we started, and then I realized that I've lent it out to some. Well, mine's lent out to a friend right now. So I'm like, oh, I guess I need to get a few more copies to always make sure I've got one in backup. Because mine is all marked up and well loved. It is an absolutely incredible book. We'll make sure that the link is in the show notes. I know you mentioned like you're getting in with schools and looking for those partnerships. So I just wanted to ask if there is any nannies here who see a need in their community, how do they get in touch with Timbernook, get you to come to their nanny kids school, or if they know of a plot of land in a urban area that, Timbernook could come to possibly. How do they connect with you and your organization to help spread the goodness of nature play?
Yeah. So yeah, if you go on our website, you can see that we do certify schools to do Timbernook, and it's a specific kind of training. And then we also do Timbernook providership, where it's an individual organization that wants to run community programming, like homeschool programming, summer camps, night experiences, but like anything that's for the community, toddler programming. So they can check that out and just reach out to us with questions as well.
Amazing. Yes. I know nannies have asked me how to start their own nature. So I'm like, go get Timbernook certified. So if you are one of those who have dreamed of it, definitely check it out. Well, it was so lovely to have you here, Angela. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.